I would like to revolutionize how you all think of your cell phone. So let's start with a few questions. About how many photos do you think you have on your cell phone? A show of hands. How about over 100? Okay, good. How about over 1,000? Yeah, I am one of those. I've got loads of pictures of my kids at their soccer games. I've got concerts I've been to, some really tasty meals I've eaten, and maybe a cute selfie or two. We love to document our lives, don't we? But now let me ask you another question about how many recorded oral histories do you think you have on your cell phone? Show of hands. None. Well, you are not alone if you don't even know what a recorded oral history is or even how to do that. But a recorded oral history is just as it sounds. It's a history spoken and then recorded. Studs Terkel made a living doing this with regular folk in Chicago and writing his books. National Public Radio has built an entire industry out of doing this in the form of interviews. But when was the last time that we sat down with the important people in our lives, the regular folk, and talked to them? Maybe a neighbor that came here from a war-torn country. Maybe our grandparents during the civil rights movement. Maybe even our kids after an exciting soccer game. You see, everyone has a story to tell. I first realized the importance of recorded oral histories when I went to find out a little bit more about the music that I fell in love with in the 1990s, ska music. This is a form of Jamaican jazz that came before reggae. And at the time in the 90s, there were plenty of bands that were coming through Chicago playing their form of the music. And in fact, many of the Jamaican originators were coming through as well. I thought, where did this music come from? What is this lively music? I wanted to find out more. These were the days before the internet. So I went to the library, and there simply weren't any books. There were plenty on reggae, but nothing on the music that came before that, ska. So I started conducting my own oral histories, recording many of these musicians. I had a micro cassette tape recorder and micro cassette tapes. And I recorded many of them, asking them how they started this music. But then life happened. I got married, I had children, I moved a half a dozen times. And then as these Jamaican musicians, many of them in their 80s, started dying, I felt guilty because here they had shared their life story with me, and the micro cassette tapes were sitting in a box in my basement. So I pulled them back out, I wove them together in a tapestry, and I wrote my first book, Ska, An Oral History. Now, over the years, I've written more books in the same genre and talked to many musicians. But it wasn't until just last year that I realized an entire segment of Jamaican music history had been ignored. That was the women. So that became the subject of my most recent book, Songbirds, Pioneering Women in Jamaican Music. There had been over 500 books written on Bob Marley. And don't get me wrong, I love Bob Marley. In fact, I love Bob Marley. But where were all these books on the women who backed up Bob Marley, the women who played trumpet and guitar, the wives, the mothers, the shopkeepers? There were women like Marcia Griffiths. She's the one here on the right. If you've ever been to a wedding reception and danced the electric slide, yeah, we know you have. That's Marcia Griffiths. And granted, it's not her best work, but she was one of the members of the I-Threes that sang backup for Bob Marley. I asked Marcia, how could you go on tour with Bob Marley in Europe and in America when you had a 1-year-old baby to raise? I can't even remember to feed myself some mornings. She said that she brought her baby with her on the tour bus, and that Bob, she was on a first-name basis with him, and that the other members of the band treated her like family. She's had a career that has spanned 50 years, and I could have talked to her all day long. There were women like Hortense Ellis. Hortense Ellis was born in one of the roughest neighborhoods in Kingston, Jamaica, Trench Town. She had 9 children. She recorded in order to feed her family. And so when I talked to her daughter and recorded her oral history, she told me that sometimes the record producers wouldn't pay her. And so she would have to go down to the recording studios and get a little rude with them. It's no wonder that one of Hortense Ellis' most popular songs is called Woman of the Ghetto, a cover of a Marlena Shaw song in which she sings, "How do you feed your children in the ghetto? How do you feed one mouth but starve another?" Her daughter told me that when she died at the age of 59, she had 26 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, and that her family always came first. There were women like Janet Enright, the guitarist. Now, Janet is a proper lady. She's in her 80s today, but she won't tell me how old she is, and she won't tell me what year she's born because she knows that I can do the math. But Janet was a privileged woman. As a young girl, she was given private guitar lessons, she was provided with a tutor, and she performed the guitar for the Prime Minister at some of his garden parties. When she was 14 years old, she went to perform with an all-girls orchestra. But that night when she was performing, her talent was so good that she was placed with the all-male orchestra. When she went to strum her guitar, there was no sound coming from it. She turned around to see that her father had come to retrieve her, and he had unplugged her amp. He said that he didn't want his daughter playing with those prisoners. He was alluding to the fact that they were from a lower class. But Janet persevered. She went on to lead her own orchestra called the Janet Enright Combo, and she still performs today. Now, these are just some of the amazing women whose oral histories I had the privilege of recording. But they were 20 feet from stardom, and now they are center stage, right next to Bob Marley, on the bookshelf, in the library, in the musical canon. Even though this is my mission, it should be the mission of all of us, anyone who cares about preserving the history of the people that are important in our lives. David Isay has created something called StoryCorps. These are audio booths that he has set up at the Library of Congress, in Grand Central Station, even in Chicago at the Cultural Center. He even has an app that can do that. And we have the power to add to that on our own cell phones. We can record an oral history with our voice memo. Extend that phone across the dinner table, across the holiday table. Ask our grandparents how it was during the Great Depression. Ask our son, hey, how did you score that goal during the soccer game? Collectively, we can pool these together in our nursing homes, in our schools, in towns, in communities, in museums. The possibilities are only limited by the amount of time that we have to give. Of all the oral histories that I've recorded, the 2 most important ones were with my own grandparents. My grandfather and how he got his job during the Great Depression at U.S. Steel, and he worked there for 44 years. My grandmother and how her family came here from Hungary and had a family farm when they raised their 9 children. Today, these are family heirlooms. So a West African saying tells us that every time an elder dies, a library burns. Don't let our histories die before we have a chance to preserve them. So see, some people may say that a photo is worth 1,000 words. And I love my 1,000 photos. But I would argue that words, well, they're pretty important too. Thank you.